In the Black Hills of 1876, a deadly game of survival is about to unfold. When Sarah Mackenzie married Wade Blackwood, she thought she was choosing security. Instead, she became a prisoner to the most ruthless outlaw leader in the Dakota Territory. What Wade doesn't know is that someone has been watching his stronghold. Running Cloud isn't your typical Lakota warrior. He's a legendary scout whose name strikes fear into the hearts of outlaws across the frontier. His people call him Shadow. Walker, the one who moves unseen between two worlds. This isn't just another rescue story. This is about how the most notorious gang in the Black Hills would learn that some chains aren't meant to hold, and some warriors answer to a higher law than man's. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mackenzie twisted the gold band on her finger, feeling the secret scratches she'd carved inside it. Each morning, she added another mark. 712 days of captivity disguised as marriage. The ring caught the early morning light streaming through the cabin's windows. Windows that might have been beautiful if they weren't lined with iron bars, painted to look like decorative cross-hatching. From her perch at the writing desk, she could see the entire compound coming to life. Wade's men emerging from their quarters, smoke rising from the cookhouse chimney, horses being led to water, everything running like clockwork, just as her husband demanded. The legendary Blackwood precision that had made his gang the most feared. In the territory, she opened the leather-bound ledger before her, carefully recording the day's numbers as she did every morning. Wade trusted her with the books because he thought her father's business training made her valuable. He didn't know that every figure she wrote down was also being committed to memory, every shipment route and contractor's name catalogued in her mind. Information was power, and Sarah had learned to gather it like a squirrel storing nuts for winter. The sound of spurs on the porch made her spine stiffen. Wade's distinctive walk, the slight drag of his left boot from an old bullet wound. He'd told her that story on their first meeting, painting himself as a hero who'd taken the shot protecting an innocent family from raiders. She'd later learned from his drunken boasting that he'd actually been shot running from a posse after murdering that same family. "My lovely wife," he said, entering the room with the fluid grace that had first caught her eye 2 years ago. "Always so diligent with our accounts." He placed his hands on her shoulders, and she forced herself not to flinch. The hands that seemed so strong and protective when they'd first met now felt like iron shackles. The Miller shipment brought in more than expected, she reported, keeping her voice steady, and Thompson's crew delivered the full payment for last month's protection. Wade squeezed her shoulders in approval. "This is why I chose you, Sarah. Beauty and brains, a rare combination." He leaned down to kiss her cheek, his breath smelling of coffee and tobacco. "You've made me a very happy man," Sarah thought. Of the day she'd made that choice, when Wade Blackwood rode into her dying father's general store in Deadwood. She'd been desperate then, the bank threatening foreclosure, her father's consumption getting worse, and no prospects for a single woman in a rough mining town. Wade had seemed like salvation, with his fine clothes, polite manners, and promises of a comfortable life. "I have business in Rapid City," Wade announced, straightening up. "I'll be gone 3 days. Jenkins and his boys will keep you safe." The threat in those last words was clear, though his tone remained pleasant. Jenkins was the cruelest of Wade's lieutenants, a man who enjoyed hurting people a little too much. "Of course, dear," Sarah replied, the familiar words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'll have everything in order for your return." She watched through the barred windows as Wade mounted his black stallion and rode out with 4 of his men. The remaining gang members would watch the compound and her with their usual vigilance. But even the most vigilant guards couldn't watch everything all the time. Sarah returned to the ledger, but her mind was elsewhere. Last night, she'd seen something from her window, a shadow moving through the pines that surrounded the compound. Not the usual movement of Wade's sentries, but something different, something that made her heart beat faster with either fear or hope, she wasn't sure which. She glanced down at the wedding ring again, at its false promises of love and protection. Through the windows, she could see the dense forest that surrounded Wade's kingdom of criminals. Somewhere in those trees, she'd seen the shadow. And for the first time in 712 days, she felt something dangerous begin to stir in her chest. Hope Running Cloud moved through the forest like a breath of wind, his moccasins finding purchase on the damp earth without leaving a trace. The carved wooden charm at his neck, his father's last gift, bumped softly against his chest as he crouched behind a massive pine. From this vantage point, he could see the entire Blackwood compound while remaining invisible among the shadows of dawn. The morning fog clung to the valley like a spirit blanket, obscuring the lower portions of the compound's walls. He'd been watching this place for nearly a moon now, learning its rhythms, understanding its weaknesses. What had started as tracking raiders who'd been terrorizing nearby settlements had led him to something far more sinister. Wade Blackwood. The name was spoken in whispers, even among the most hardened frontier settlers. Running Cloud's people knew him by a different name, Wazir Seeker, evil spirit of the north, a man who brought only death and sorrow wherever his shadow fell. His eyes tracked the outlaw leader as he mounted his horse and rode out with his men. Running Cloud's hand instinctively moved to touch the charm at his neck, remembering the day he'd found similar tracks leading away from his family's burning home. He'd been too late then, too far away on a hunting trip to protect them. The weight of that failure had shaped him into who he was now. The Shadow Walker, a warrior who moved between the world of his people and the world of the white settlers, seeking to maintain balance and justice. Movement at an upper window caught his attention. The woman, Sarah Mackenzie Blackwood. He'd learned her name from conversations overheard at the edge of the compound. She wasn't what he'd expected of. An outlaw's wife. There was a stillness about her that reminded him of a deer sensing danger, always alert, always watching. And like a deer, she was both graceful and trapped. Running Cloud had seen the bruises she tried to hide, noticed how she flinched at loud noises and sudden movements. He recognized the signs. His sister had worn the same look in the months before the raiders came. The memory made his jaw clench. He shifted position as the sun rose higher, moving like smoke through the trees. The guards never noticed him. They looked but did not see, heard but did not listen. His father had taught him the old ways of moving through forest and shadow, skills passed down through generations of warriors. Skills that had kept him alive when so many others had fallen to the greed and violence of men like Blackwood. A glint of metal drew his attention back to the window. Sarah was holding something, a book or ledger, up to the light. Her movements were precise, deliberate. She wasn't just reading, she was studying, memorizing. Running Cloud felt his respect for her grow. She was fighting her own war in her own way. He pulled a small spyglass from his buckskin shirt, a trade item that had proved invaluable in his work. Through it, he could see her face clearly for the first time. The set of her jaw spoke of determination, not defeat. The way she glanced frequently at the guards' positions told him she was mapping their patterns just as he was. The crack of a twig behind him made Running Cloud freeze. He closed his eyes, letting his other senses paint a picture of his surroundings. The slight shift in the wind's direction, the sudden silence of a nearby jay. Someone was approaching from the west, moving with the casual confidence of someone who thought themselves unobserved. He melted deeper into the shadows of the pine, becoming one with the tree's ancient presence. A moment later, one of Blackwood's men walked past, rifle cradled carelessly in his arms. The man paused, lighting a cigarette, completely unaware that death could have taken him in any of a dozen ways had Running Cloud wished it. But needless killing wasn't his way. Each life taken demanded answer to the spirits, demanded justification. His father had taught him that power came not from how many enemies you could kill, but from how many lives you could protect. looking back at the window where Sarah stood. Running Cloud felt the truth of those words settle in his heart. He watched until she moved away from the window, then began his silent retreat into the deeper forest. He had preparations to make. The carved charm at his neck seemed to pulse with the beating of his heart, reminding him of promises made and kept. Soon, very soon, another promise would be made, one that would either bring justice to this shadowed valley or add his own bones to its dark soil. The sound of breaking glass shattered the evening quiet. Sarah stood amid the wreckage of her husband's prized whiskey decanter, her hands trembling. Wade's face had gone deadly still, that familiar coldness creeping into his eyes that always preceded his worst moments. "Now why would you go and do a foolish thing like that?" His voice was soft, reasonable, the voice that had once charmed her father, that had made her believe in false promises. But she wasn't that naive girl anymore. "The lumber mill payment is missing $300, she said, forcing steel into her voice. "Those are working men's wages, Wade. Families depending on that money." He moved toward her with that fluid grace that now seemed serpentine. "Since when does my wife question my business decisions? Since you started stealing from honest people, instead of just running protection." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice screamed at her to be quiet, to survive, to endure as she had for so long. But something had changed. Perhaps it was seeing that shadow in the woods, knowing someone else was watching, witnessing. Perhaps it was simply that her soul had finally had enough. Wade's hand shot out, fingers digging into her arm. "You seem to have forgotten your place, dear wife. Maybe it's time for a reminder." Sarah's free hand found the broken neck of the decanter behind her. In one fluid motion she swung it up, the jagged edge catching the lamplight. Wade jerked back, but not before the glass traced a thin red line across his cheek. Time seemed to stop. A drop of blood rolled down Wade's face, falling to stain his pristine white shirt. His eyes went from cold to burning in an instant. What followed was a blur of pain and desperate movement. Sarah remembered running, the cool night air hitting her face as she burst out the cabin door. She made it halfway across the compound before Wade's men caught her. Her dress, the blue cotton one she'd sewn herself last spring, tore on the fence as they dragged her back. Now she sat in the root cellar, listening to the muffled sounds of Wade's rage above. Her body ached, but it was her spirit that felt truly battered. She touched the scrap of her dress caught on her sleeve, a strip of blue cotton that would mark her first real act of defiance. Through the cellar's tiny window, she could see the edge of the forest. Was he out there, the shadow she'd glimpsed? Or had that just been her mind creating hope where none existed? The cellar door creaked open. Jenkins stood there, his face emotionless. "Boss wants you back upstairs. Says you need to learn to show proper gratitude for everything he's given you." Sarah stood slowly, her legs shaking but her spine straight. As Jenkins led her toward the stairs, she noticed something odd through the window. A flicker of movement, then a flash of what looked like firelight deep in the trees. Not the usual patrol torches. This was different, rhythmic, like a signal. Jenkins saw it too. He frowned, moving toward the window for a better look. In that moment of distraction, Sarah's hand found a rusted garden trowel on a nearby shelf. The impact when she struck him wasn't enough to do real damage, but it bought her precious seconds. She burst out of the cellar into the cool night air, running not toward the compound gate. They'd expect that, but toward the back fence, where the guard posts were furthest apart. Her heart thundered in her chest as she heard shouts of alarm going up. The fence loomed before her, moonlight gleaming off its sharp top. She'd never make it over, not in time. But as she reached it, something extraordinary happened. A rope, thin but strong, dropped from above, weighted with a small cloth bag that thumped softly in the dirt. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the rope, bracing her feet against the fence. As shouts grew closer, she felt a strong pull from above, helping her climb. Her arms burned, her torn dress caught and ripped further. but she kept moving. She was nearly at the top when Wade's voice cut through the chaos. "Sarah!" She looked down to see him standing in the yard, his face terrible in the torchlight. "If you leave now, I will burn every farm and homestead between here and Deadwood. Their blood will be on your hands." Sarah froze. This was the moment she realized that would define the rest of her life. Stay and keep others safe through her own sacrifice. Leave and risk bringing Wade's vengeance down on innocent people. The rope tugged gently, urgently. Above her, barely visible in the darkness, she caught a glimpse of a face, strong, noble features and eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Running Cloud. The shadow had a name. Last chance. "Sarah!" Wade called up. "Be smart now!" Sarah looked down at her husband, at the life she'd chosen in desperation. Then she looked up at the promise of freedom, at eyes that held not ownership but understanding. She climbed. The forest swallowed them whole. Running Cloud led Sarah through the darkness with an ease that seemed supernatural, his hand firm but gentle on her elbow when she stumbled. Behind them, the shouts and torchlights of Wade's men grew fainter, though Sarah knew the respite wouldn't last long. They moved in silence until they reached a small clearing where 2 horses waited, perfectly, still and quiet, as if they understood the need for secrecy. Running Cloud helped her mount one, then pressed something into her hand, an eagle feather, its edges gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "Hold this," he said, his voice low and melodious, with just a hint of accent. "Among my people, it carries the spirits of protection." He swung onto his own horse with fluid grace. "We ride north until dawn." Sarah clutched the feather, feeling its soft strength. "Wade will come after us. He'll make good on his threat about the farms." "I know." Running Cloud turned his horse toward a barely visible trail. "That is why we must reach my people before he can gather his men. There are more warriors who will stand against him, but first we must survive this night." They rode hard through the darkness, the horses somehow finding sure footing despite the treacherous terrain. Sarah's whole body ached from her earlier confrontation and the desperate climb, but she forced herself to focus on staying mounted and alert. The night wind carried the sweet scent of pine and sage, so different from the stale air of her prison. After what felt like hours, Running Cloud raised his hand for halt. They'd reached higher ground, and Sarah could see the compound in the distance. A cluster of angry lights like fallen stars. Wade's men were mounting up, preparing for the hunt. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question that had burned in her mind finally finding voice. Running Cloud was silent for a long moment, his hand going to a wooden charm he wore around his neck. 2 summers ago, raiders attacked my village while I was away hunting. My sister, she was like you, trapped, afraid. His eyes met hers in the darkness. I was too late to save her. But when I saw you through that window, saw your spirit fighting against the darkness, I knew I had been given another chance to right a wrong. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry about your sister." He nodded once, acknowledging her. Words. "We all walk in 2 worlds, Sarah Mackenzie. The world we are born to and the world we choose. Tonight, you chose to walk a different path." A distant shout carried on the wind, followed by the thunder of hooves. Running Cloud's expression hardened. "They've found our trail sooner than I hoped. We must—" His words cut off as an arrow thudded into a tree trunk beside them. Sarah's horse reared, nearly unseating her, but Running Cloud's hand shot out to steady them both. "Ride!" he commanded, turning his horse toward a dense patch of forest. "Follow the North Star. I will lead them away." "No." Sarah reached out, catching his arm. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My people have a saying. A warrior's honor is measured not in battles won, but in lives protected. Trust in the spirits, Sarah Mackenzie, and trust in yourself." He pressed something else into her hand, a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "If we are separated, go to the great black rock that looks like a sleeping bear. Show this medicine bag to any Lakota you meet. They will help you." Before she could protest further, he wheeled his horse around and rode back the way they'd come, letting out a war cry that echoed through the hills. Sarah saw him silhouetted against the moon for one breathtaking moment, proud, fearless, and free, before he vanished into the shadows. She clutched the medicine bag and eagle feather, her heart torn between fear and a strange new feeling of strength. Then she turned her horse northward and rode, letting the stars guide her way. Behind her, she heard more shouts, the sound of pursuit diverging as some of Wade's men followed Running Cloud's false trail. The night wind whispered through the pines, and for a moment Sarah thought she heard voices in it, ancient spirits, speaking of courage and change, of choices and consequences, of two worlds becoming one. She touched the eagle feather to her lips like a prayer and rode on, carrying hope like a flame in the darkness. Dawn painted the black hills in shades of gold and shadow when Sarah finally found the sleeping bear rock. Her body felt like one massive bruise, and her torn dress was stiff with dried sweat and dew. She'd ridden through the night, stopping only when necessary to let her horse rest, always listening for pursuit. From her vantage point, she could see smoke rising from a hidden valley, exactly where Running Cloud had said his people's camp would be, but he hadn't returned. The thought made her stomach clench with worry, not just for him, but for what his absence might mean. The medicine bag felt warm against her chest where she'd tucked it under her dress. She pulled it out now, studying the intricate beadwork that told a story she couldn't read but could feel in her bones. A story of courage, of protection, of promises kept. Movement in the trees below made her tense, but it was nothing like Wade's men's crude stalking. 3 Lakota warriors materialized from the forest like spirits, their faces painted for war. Sarah held up the medicine bag with trembling fingers. The oldest of the warriors stepped forward, his eyes sharp as he examined the bag. He spoke rapidly, in Lakota, to his companions before addressing her in careful English. "I am Black Elk. Shadow Walker sent you?" "Running Cloud," Sarah corrected, then realized they were the same person. "Yes, he led Wade's men away to protect me, but he hasn't returned." Black Elk's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Come, we have much to discuss." They led her down a hidden trail to their camp, where Sarah found not just a few teepees, but a gathering of warriors from several bands. Running Cloud had been busy in the weeks before her escape, she realized, building alliances, preparing for this moment. Inside Black Elk's teepee, Sarah found herself surrounded by tribal leaders, all watching her with mixture of curiosity and wariness. She straightened her spine, remembering the ledger she'd kept so carefully at Wade's compound. Information was power, and she had plenty to share. "Wade Blackwood isn't just an outlaw," she began, her voice growing stronger. "He's building an empire. I can tell you where his men will be when they're most vulnerable. I know their routes, their contacts, their weaknesses." She pulled a wrinkled paper from her bodice, a crude map she'd drawn during her weeks of careful observation. "And I know he's planning something big, something that will hurt both your people and the settlers if we don't stop him." Black Elk studied the map, his expression thoughtful. "Shadow Walker spoke of your courage. Now I see he spoke of your wisdom as well." He passed the map to the others. "But Blackwood is not a snake easily killed. He has friends in high places, papers that make his evil look legal to white man's law. Then we don't fight him with guns." "Alone," Sarah said, an idea taking shape. "We fight him with his own weapons, papers, proof, testimony. I kept records of everything. If we can get those ledgers—" A commotion outside interrupted her. Sarah's heart leaped as Running Cloud entered the teepee, his clothes dusty but otherwise unharmed. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt that same jolt of connection she'd experienced in the forest. "Blackwood's men searched the wrong valley," he reported, settling cross-legged into the circle. "But they will not be fooled for long. He has sent riders to Fort Lincoln, claiming we kidnapped his wife. They will send soldiers. Sarah's blood ran cold. Wade was cleverer than she'd given him credit for. By involving the military, he'd turned a personal manhunt into a territorial issue. Her hand went to the eagle feather she still carried, drawing strength from its presence. "How long?" Black Elk asked. 3 days, maybe 4 before the soldiers arrive. Running Cloud's eyes held a fierce light. "But that may be all we need. While leading his men away, I heard them talk. Wade plans to meet a big shipment tomorrow night. Something valuable enough that he's pulling most of his men from the compound to guard it." Sarah leaned forward. "The ledgers will be virtually unguarded, if we could get them along with the other proof I gathered." She paused, realizing she'd said "we" without thinking. Black Elk smiled for the first time. "So, the hunted becomes the hunter." He looked around the circle. "Who will ride with Shadow Walker and the Brave One to strike at the snake's heart?" Every hand in the teepee raised. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, no longer the terror of prey, but the fierce joy of someone who had found her pack, her purpose, her power. Running Cloud caught her eye again, and this time his small hood carried a wealth of meaning. They had a chance, slim as it might be. Tomorrow night would change everything, one way or another. Twilight settled over the Lakota camp like a prayer blanket, bringing with it the smell of sage smoke and cooking fires. Sarah sat at the edge of the camp, watching the women prepare the evening meal while their children played nearby. She'd been given clean clothes, a dress of soft tanned deerskin decorated with simple beadwork, and for the first time in years, she felt like herself again. "Your hands remember what they have not yet learned," came Running Cloud's voice behind her. She turned to find him watching her weave a simple bracelet from trade beads and sinew, a skill she'd picked up just by observing the women throughout the day. "My father used to say I had clever fingers," she replied, holding up the unfinished bracelet. Small metal beads worked into the pattern would allow it to carry messages in Morse code. Another skill from her past that might prove useful, though I never thought I'd use them quite like this. Running Cloud settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not so close as to draw attention. In his hands, he held a small leather pouch, similar to the medicine bag he'd given her. "Tomorrow night," he said softly, "we must move as one. No words can be spoken once we are near the compound." He opened the pouch, revealing a collection of small objects, pebbles, feathers, bits of bark. "These will be our language." For the next hour, as the sun sank behind the hills, he taught her the silent code of his people. A white pebble dropped, meant danger ahead. A hawk feather placed on the ground pointed to the safe path. 3 taps on wood meant wait. 2 meant run. Sarah's mind, already sharp from years of keeping Wade's books, absorbed it all. She found herself sharing her own knowledge in return. The patrol patterns of Wade's men, the creaky boards on the compound's back stairs, the hiding place beneath the floorboards where he kept his most damning documents. "You survived not just with courage," Running Cloud observed, "but with wisdom. Like a beaver building its lodge piece by piece, you gathered what you needed." "I was so afraid," Sarah admitted, the words coming easier in the growing darkness. "Every day I thought about running, but the things Wade would do to others if I did." She twisted the bracelet in her hands. "Sometimes survival feels like a kind of cowardice." Running Cloud was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently took the bracelet from her trembling fingers. With deft movements, he added a single blue bead to the pattern. "Among my people," he said, "blue represents truth and wisdom, the sky that watches over us all." His fingers brushed hers as he returned the bracelet. "What you call survival, I call warrior's patience. You waited until the right moment, gathered your weapons, and chose your ground. There is no cowardice in that." A cry went up from the camp. Riders approaching. Running Cloud was on his feet, instantly bow in hand, but it was only their scouts returning. The news they brought cast a shadow over the gathering darkness. "Wade's men have started burning homesteads," Running Cloud translated grimly. "They claim to be searching for you, but they're really sending a message. Tomorrow's raid must succeed, or more innocent people will suffer. Sarah stood, clutching the bracelet like a talisman. Then we better make sure it does. She met his eyes in the fading light. Teach me more of your silent language, and I'll teach you where Wade keeps his guards, where the ledgers are hidden, everything I know. Through the night, they shared their knowledge, building a bridge between their worlds, bead by bead, sign by sign. When dawn approached, Sarah realized they'd completed the bracelet together, its pattern now a perfect blend of both their teachings. Running Cloud held it up to the first light of morning. A warrior's bond, he said softly, helping her tie it around her wrist. May it carry us both through what comes next. Sarah touched the blue bead that marked the center of the pattern. In that moment, she felt the weight of tomorrow's task settle over them both, not as a burden, but as a shared purpose. Whatever happened at the compound, they would face it together, their two languages becoming one in the darkness. The letter arrived with the morning scout, a crumpled piece of paper that made Sarah's blood run cold as soon as she recognized the handwriting. It had been found in the ashes of a burned homestead, deliberately left where the Lakota scouts would find it. My dearest wife, Wade's elegant script mocked her with its false tenderness. By now you've seen what your selfishness has wrought, but I am a forgiving man. Return to me by tomorrow's sunset, and I'll consider these recent unpleasantnesses forgotten. If not, the letter went on to name 3 more homesteads, 3 more families who would pay the price for her freedom. But it was the last paragraph that made her hands shake. I know all about your savage friend's plans for tonight. Did you really think Jenkins was the only one keeping secrets? Ask him about the night my men caught him stealing horses last month. Ask what price he paid for his freedom. Sarah looked up from the letter to find Running Cloud watching her, his face unreadable. Jenkins, she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Wade's lieutenant. He's been feeding him information. The revelation spread through the War Council like wildfire. Jenkins had been one of Wade's most brutal enforcers, but Sarah had noticed him growing increasingly erratic in recent months. Now she understood why. He'd been caught, turned, used as a spy while maintaining his vicious reputation as cover. The raid tonight, Black Elk said gravely. It is a trap. No. Running Cloud's voice cut through the growing tension. It is an opportunity. Wade thinks he knows our plans, but he only knows what Jenkins told him. And Jenkins only knows what we allowed him to see. Sarah's mind raced back through the previous day's preparations, the very public discussion of their strategy. The back entrance, she said slowly. We made sure Jenkins overheard us planning to use it, but I know a better way in. Through the old mine tunnel. Wade sealed it off last year, but I used to hear water running behind the wall in the root. Cellar. The tunnel must pass right beneath it. Running Cloud nodded, a fierce light in his eyes. So while Wade's men watch the back entrance, we'll come up right under their feet. Sarah pulled out her crude map, adding new details. The tunnel will be narrow, but if we time it right, we can get a small group inside before they know what's happening. Black Elk studied the new plan. It is bold, perhaps too bold. If you are caught beneath the earth, then we die knowing we tried, Running Cloud said firmly. Better that than watching more innocent people suffer while we hide in the hills. The council erupted in discussion, warriors arguing strategies and risks in rapid Lakota. Sarah used the moment to step closer to Running Cloud, pitching her voice. Low. Wade's letter. There's something else, something worse. She handed it to him, watching as he read the final lines she hadn't shared with the others. His jaw tightened as he read Wade's last threat, not against homesteaders this time, but against the nearby Lakota camps. Wade claimed to have discovered their locations, threatened to bring not just his men, but soldiers, with trumped-up charges of raids and stolen horses. He's trying to start a war, Sarah whispered. If he can provoke a conflict between your people and the army, then he can play both sides, sell weapons, claim more territory. Running Cloud's hand went to the wooden charm at his neck. The spirits warned me this night would come, when the shadow of betrayal would force us to choose between safety and justice. Sarah touched the beaded bracelet on her wrist, feeling the pattern she and Running Cloud had created together. "Then we choose justice," she said firmly. "But we do it smart. Wade thinks he knows our plan. Let's show him how little he really understands." As the council continued to debate, Sarah and Running Cloud bent over the map together, adding and revising, weaving a new plan as intricate as a pattern. Through the opening in the teepee, Sarah could see the sun climbing higher. Soon it would be time to move. She caught Running Cloud watching her again, something unspoken burning in his dark eyes. They both knew that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. Whether they succeeded or failed, the future would be written in the choices they made in the coming darkness. Sarah straightened her spine, touching the blue bead at the center of her bracelet. She was done being afraid, done letting Wade's threats control her life and endanger others. Tonight, they would write their own story in the language of courage, justice, and truth. Thunder rolled across the Black Hills like ancient drums, drowning out the sound of hoofbeats as Sarah and Running Cloud led their small group through the darkening forest. The storm had blown in from the north, unexpected and fierce, turning twilight to near darkness, but Sarah couldn't help feeling that the spirits Running Cloud spoke of had sent it as cover for their approach. They'd left the horses half a mile back with two young warriors, proceeding on foot through terrain that grew steeper and more treacherous. Sarah's ankle, already tender from her escape 2 nights ago, protested each step. Running Cloud had noticed, her limping and pressed a small medicine pouch into her hands. Herbs that smelled of pine and sweetgrass, meant to ease pain and bring strength. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the rocky outcrop that marked the old mine entrance. Sarah held up her hand, signaling the group to halt using the silent language she and Running Cloud had practiced. In the brief flash of light, she counted Wade's sentries, 2 on the ridge above, 3 more patrolling the perimeter they could see. Fewer than normal, just as she'd predicted. Wade had pulled most of his men to guard his mysterious shipment, leaving what he thought was a secure compound only lightly defended. Running Cloud touched her arm, pointing to a spot where water trickled from the hillside. Sarah nodded. The sealed mine tunnel had to be there. They'd need to work fast before the storm turned the ground to mud and made their task impossible. The small group moved forward in perfect silence, using the thunder as cover. 2 Lakota warriors melted into the shadows, circling around to deal with the sentries if needed. Sarah led the rest to the spot where old timbers still protruded from the hillside, half rotted but visible to those who knew where to look. Running Cloud produced tools from beneath his buckskin shirt. A small crowbar, a coil of rope, the items they'd prepared when revising their plan. As he worked to pry loose the first board, Sarah kept watch, her heart pounding in time with the thunder. A crack louder than the storm made them all freeze. One of the timbers had split, sending a shower of dirt and small rocks clattering down the slope. Sarah held her breath, watching the sentries above. But the storm's fury masked the sound of their work. The opening they created was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Running Cloud went first, testing the stability of the old tunnel. Sarah followed, trying not to think about the tons of earth above them, or the way the timbers creaked with each thunderclap. The passage twisted downward, the air growing thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting wood. Sarah's knowledge of the compound's layout guided them, 20 paces forward, then a turn to the east, where the tunnel should pass directly beneath the root cellar. Lightning flashed again, filtering through cracks in the tunnel roof. In that instant, Sarah saw something that made her grab Running Cloud's arm. Boot prints in the mud, fresh ones, leading deeper into the tunnel. They weren't alone. Running Cloud signaled the others to be ready. Someone had discovered their route, perhaps Jenkins himself, but they'd come too far to turn back now. Sarah touched the beaded bracelet for courage and pressed forward. The tunnel widened slightly, opening into what had once been a larger chamber. The sound of rain was louder here, water dripping through the ceiling. And there, barely visible in the darkness, was movement. "I wondered if you'd figure it out," came a familiar voice that made Sarah's blood freeze. Jenkins stepped into view, holding a lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other. "Had to make sure you'd choose this route. Wade's orders." Sarah felt Running Cloud tense beside her, ready to spring. But Jenkins wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, 4 of Wade's men, all armed. "You've been playing both sides all along," Sarah said, her mind racing for options. Even the horse theft was staged. Jenkins smiled, the lantern light making his face look skull-like. "Wade knows you got his letter, knows you'd try to be clever, and avoid his trap at the back entrance. He's waiting up there right now, ready to gun down your warriors when they try to rescue you." Thunder boomed directly overhead, making the tunnel shudder. Dirt and pebbles rained down as ancient timbers groaned. Sarah felt something shift in the earth around them, a warning. "The tunnel's not stable," she said urgently. "This storm, the whole thing could come down." "Shut up," Jenkins snarled, but she saw fear flicker in his eyes. He knew she was right. The tunnel that had survived decades was weakening, saturated by the storm's fury. A crack like splitting bone echoed through the chamber. Running Cloud moved with shocking speed, knocking Sarah aside as a support beam gave way. Chaos erupted in the darkness, shouts, gunshots, the horrifying sound of earth giving way. Sarah's world narrowed to desperate movement, guided by Running Cloud's hand gripping hers. They scrambled through falling dirt and splintering wood, the tunnel collapsing behind them. She heard screams cut short, felt the rush of stale air as sections of their route caved in. When they finally broke through into the root cellar, Sarah was gasping, covered in mud, her ankles screaming in protest. 4 of their warriors had made it. The others... Running Cloud pulled her close, checking her for injuries. His face was streaked with dirt and blood from a cut above his eye, but his grip was strong and sure. Above them, they could hear boots on floorboards, Wade's men responding to the noise of the cave-in. "They'll know we're here," Sarah whispered. Running Cloud nodded grimly. "Then we make their knowledge work against them." He looked at their remaining warriors, then back to Sarah. "Are you ready?" Sarah touched her bracelet one last time, feeling the pattern she and Running Cloud had created together. Their fates were woven now, like beads on a string. She nodded. "Then we finish this," Running Cloud said. "No matter the cost." Sarah led the way up the root cellar stairs, each step carefully, placed to avoid the boards that would betray their presence. The storm still raged outside, but within the compound's walls she could hear movement. Wade's men responding to the tunnel collapse, their boots heavy on the floorboards above. Through a crack in the door, she saw Annie, one of the other, wives passing by with a lantern. The young woman paused, and for a moment Sarah feared she would raise the alarm. Instead, Annie set the lantern down and withdrew a folded paper from her apron. A page torn from the secret journal the wives had been keeping, documenting every cruel act they'd witnessed. "They're searching the north side," Annie whispered, through the crack, sliding the paper under the door. "Wade's in his office with the ledgers. He's burning them, Sarah. Everything you kept record of." Sarah's heart clenched, but she forced herself to think clearly. "The rest of the journal, hidden where you showed us. The other wives, we're ready. Just give the signal." Annie's footsteps faded away, but her words hung in the air like smoke. Running Cloud touched Sarah's shoulder, questioning. She showed him the paper, its edges smudged with dirt and tears. "There are others," she whispered. "Women like me, waiting for their chance. Annie's telling us we're not alone." He nodded, understanding flowing between them without words. Their plan had changed, but perhaps for the better. The storm, the tunnel collapse, even Jenkins' betrayal, all of it had led to this moment. Sarah pulled out her crude map, now water-stained, but still legible. With quick gestures using their shared silent language, she showed Running Cloud and the warriors a new route. The compound's main house had a servants' corridor that ran behind the walls, a path she'd discovered during her long months of careful observation. They moved like shadows through the narrow passage, the storm masking their progress. Through gaps in the walls, Sarah caught glimpses of the compound's inhabitants in motion. Not just Wade's men, but the wives, the servants, all playing their parts in this dance of power and resistance. Near Wade's office, they paused. Sarah could hear his voice through the wall, angry and urgent. "Find her. She has to be here somewhere. And bring me Jenkins. That fool was supposed to trap them in the tunnel." Running Cloud's hand found Sarah's in the darkness, squeezing once. They both knew what Wade didn't, that Jenkins and his men lay buried in the collapsed tunnel, victims of their own betrayal and nature's fury. A commotion outside drew Wade's attention. What now? His footsteps moved away from the office, toward the window. Sarah didn't hesitate. She led them through a hidden door she'd discovered months ago, concealed behind a heavy cabinet. The office was empty, but evidence of Wade's desperation lay everywhere. Half-burned ledgers in the fireplace, scattered papers, an opened safe. Running Cloud moved to the window, using their silent signals to direct his warriors to guard the approaches. Sarah went straight to the fireplace, pulling papers from the flames with bare hands, not feeling the burns. Most were too far gone, but a few remained legible, enough to prove Wade's crimes. But it was what she found in the safe that made her pause. Letters, contracts, plans for something much bigger than she'd imagined. Wade wasn't just building a criminal empire. He was orchestrating a war. The mysterious shipment, the provocations against the Lakota, the burned homesteads, all part of a larger scheme to ignite conflict between settlers and tribes, profiting from both sides. The evidence was damning, but footsteps in the hallway warned them time had run out. Running Cloud was at her side instantly, gathering the papers as Sarah quickly scanned the last document. Her eyes widened. The shipment. "Tonight," she breathed. "It's not just weapons. He's buying Gatling guns, enough to arm a private army." A floorboard creaked behind them. They turned to find Wade in the doorway, his favorite Colt revolver aimed steadily at Sarah's heart. "I must admit," he said, with that terrible calm she remembered so well, "you've surprised me, dear wife. I never thought you had this kind of betrayal in you." Through the window, lightning illuminated the compound grounds where more of Wade's men were gathering. Thunder rolled across the hills like a warning drum, and somewhere in the storm, Sarah knew change was coming. The only question was who would survive to see it. Time seemed to slow in Wade's office, measured only by the drumbeat of rain against the windows and the steady hand holding the Colt revolver. Running Cloud stood perfectly still beside Sarah, but she could feel the tension in him, like a drawn bowstring waiting to release. "Step away from her, Indian," Wade said, his voice carrying that false gentleness that had once fooled Sarah. "This is between me and my wife." Running Cloud didn't move. Instead, his hand went to the carved wooden charm at his neck, his father's last gift. "There is a story among my people," he said, his voice calm despite the danger, "of a great chief who thought he could own the wind. He built walls to contain it, forged chains to bind it. But the wind taught him that some spirits cannot be caged." Wade's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Charming, but I'm not interested in savage parables." He shifted his aim slightly, the barrel now pointing at Running Cloud's chest. "I am interested in what you stole from my safe. Hand over those papers, and I might let you walk out of here." Sarah felt the weight of the documents against her chest, where she'd tucked them inside her dress. Documents that proved Wade's plans to spark a war, to profit from bloodshed on both sides. Her fingers found the beaded bracelet at her wrist, touching the blue bead that represented truth. "You're right, Wade," she said, taking a small step forward. "This is between us. You want your papers? Come and take them." Running Cloud's father's knife appeared in his hand, drawn so smoothly, Sarah hadn't seen him move. But Wade's attention was fixed on her, his eyes narrowing at her defiance. "What happened to you, Sarah?" he asked, genuine curiosity mixing with his anger. "You were such a perfect, obedient wife. Did this savage fill your head with ideas about freedom?" "No," Sarah replied, her voice stronger now. "You did that yourself, every time you hurt someone weaker, every time you took what wasn't yours, every time you made me record your cruelty in those ledgers, thinking I was just your clever little bookkeeper." She took another step forward. "I learned freedom by watching you cage it." Thunder crashed directly overhead, and in that moment everything happened at once. Running Cloud moved like lightning, his father's knife flashing in the lamplight. Wade fired, the sound lost in the storm's fury. Sarah felt something hot graze her arm as she dove for the dropped papers. More of Wade's men burst through the door, but they weren't alone. Annie and 3 other wives appeared in the hallway, armed with kitchen knives and fierce determination. In the confusion, Sarah saw Running Cloud roll to his feet, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, but his movements still deadly graceful. Wade's second shot went wild as Sarah tackled him from behind. They crashed into the desk, sending the lamp tumbling. Flames caught the scattered papers, spreading quickly to the heavy curtains. "The whole compound's rising up," someone shouted from the hallway. "The women, the servants, they're fighting." Back, Sarah fought through the smoke and chaos, searching for Running Cloud. She found him by the window, locked in combat with 2 of Wade's men. His father's knife moved like a living thing, an extension of his warrior spirit. But more men were coming, drawn by the gunfire and spreading flames. "Sarah!" Running Cloud's voice cut through the chaos. He held out his hand, the other still gripping his father's knife. "Trust me," she didn't hesitate. Taking his hand, she let him pull her toward the window. Behind them, Wade was shouting orders, trying to regain control of his crumbling empire. But Sarah could hear something else now. War cries in the storm. Black Elk and the other warriors had begun their attack, perfectly timed with the compound's internal uprising. Running Cloud's grip tightened on her hand. "My father taught me that a warrior's path is not chosen by others," he said, his eyes intense in the firelight. "It is carved by our own hearts." Sarah squeezed his hand in return. "Then let's carve it together." They crashed through the window. Just as Wade's bullets splintered the frame where they'd been standing, the storm swallowed them. Rain and wind and darkness becoming their allies as they fought for a future neither of them had imagined just days ago. The fall from the window should have killed them. Instead, Sarah and Running Cloud landed on the slick wooden awning of the lower porch, rolling with the impact. Rain lashed their faces as they scrambled for footing on the steep incline. Gunfire erupted from above, but the storm made accuracy impossible. Through the curtain of rain, Sarah saw figures moving across the compound, not just Black Elk's warriors but settlers too. She recognized homesteaders whose lands Wade had threatened, miners he'd extorted, traders he'd cheated. Word had spread, and with it, courage. "The peace pipe's vision," Running Cloud said as they reached the ground. "Many streams becoming one. River." Sarah remembered the ceremony she'd witnessed the day before, tribal leaders and settler representatives sharing the sacred pipe, binding themselves to a common cause. Now that unity was playing out in front of them, as people of both, worlds joined forces against Wade's tyranny. A familiar voice called out from the shadows of the stable. "Sarah, over here!" It was Thomas Wheeler, owner of the trading post Wade had burned last month. He pushed open the heavy doors, revealing more allies within, both settlers and Lakota warriors. The women inside, Sarah gasped as they reached shelter. "They're fighting back, but already handled," Thomas interrupted, pointing to where Annie and several other wives were being helped down from a back window by more supporters. "Your friend Mary got word to us about Wade's plans for tonight. While he was watching for your attack, we were getting his prisoners out." Running Cloud moved to the stable entrance, scanning the chaos of the compound. The fire from Wade's office had spread despite the rain, casting wild shadows across the battleground. Through the flames and storm, they could see Wade organizing his remaining loyal men into a defensive position around the main house. He's protecting something, Sarah realized. The Gatling guns, they must be in there. Then that's where we need to be. Running Cloud turned to the gathered allies. From his shirt, he withdrew a small leather pouch, another peace pipe, smaller than the one used in the ceremony but no less significant. "My father carried this into his last battle," he said, his voice carrying over the storm. "He taught me that true strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together." He opened the pouch, revealing the sacred pipe within. "Tonight, we fight not just for ourselves, but for all our children's futures." The pipe was lit, passing from hand to hand, settler to warrior, trader to tribal elder. Each draw was a pledge, each shared breath a promise. Sarah watched the ceremony in wonder, seeing decades of mistrust and fear dissolve in the face of a common enemy. A massive explosion rocked the compound. Through the stable doors, they saw Wade's men rolling out the Gatling guns, positioning them to command the open ground. "He'll murder everyone," Thomas said grimly. "Those guns don't care what color your skin is." "No." Sarah stepped forward, the documents from Wade's safe still pressed against her heart. "He needs witnesses alive. These papers prove he's been selling weapons to both sides, trying to start a war. If everyone dies here, there's no one to buy his guns." Running Cloud's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Then we give him what he fears most, unity." The plan came together quickly, passed through the gathered allies in whispers and gestures. The settlers who knew Wade's men would call out to them, appeal to whatever conscience they had left. The Lakota warriors would use the storm's cover to outflank the guns. And Sarah would face her husband one last time. As they prepared to move, Running Cloud pulled her aside. In the flickering light of the burning compound, his face was all shadows and determination. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "you've already won. You chose freedom not just for yourself, but for all these people." Sarah touched the blue bead on her bracelet, then reached up to grip the wooden charm around his neck. "We chose it together." Their eyes met in perfect understanding. Then Running Cloud raised his father's knife, calling out in Lakota to the warriors. Sarah lifted her own weapon, the truth captured in Wade's documents. Around them, settlers and tribal fighters moved as one, united by something stronger than fear. The storm raged on, but its fury was nothing compared to the tide of justice about to break over Wade Blackwood's crumbling empire. Wade's voice cut through the storm like a knife. "You have exactly 1 minute to surrender before these guns start turning." He stood behind the line of Gatling guns, his usual composure cracking around the edges. "Starting with you, dear wife." Sarah stepped out into the rain-swept yard, the documents held high above her head. "These papers say different, Wade. They say you need witnesses alive to buy your weapons, to fight your war." Her voice carried across the compound, reaching not just Wade, but his men. "How many of you know what he's really planning? How many of you signed up to murder innocent families just so he could profit?" Lightning flashed, illuminating doubt on several faces among Wade's remaining loyalists. They'd signed on for theft and extortion, not wholesale slaughter. Behind them, the main house continued to burn despite the rain, sending sparks spiraling into the storm-dark sky. "Don't listen to her!" Wade's command cracked with desperation. "She's trying to—" The rest of his words were lost as Running Clouds. Warriors burst from the shadows, their war cries mixing with the thunder. At the same instant, Thomas Wheeler and the settlers emerged from multiple directions, cutting off any retreat. The unity of their attack was perfect, but Wade still held the ultimate advantage. "Open fire!" he screamed, turning the first Gatling gun himself. Sarah's heart stopped as the weapon's multiple barrels began to spin. But instead of the devastating roar of gunfire, there was only a dull click, Again and again, the gun refused to fire. Wade's face contorted with rage as he ran to the second gun, then the third. Each weapon sat silent, useless. "What did you do?" he snarled at his men. "Who sabotaged my guns?" A laugh bubbled up from Sarah's throat as she remembered Annie's words from earlier. The other wives, "We're ready." While Wade had focused on external threats, the women inside his compound had been busy. How many small acts of sabotage, how many critical pieces removed and hidden, had it taken to silence his deadly weapons? Running Cloud appeared beside her like a spirit, his father's knife gleaming in the lightning. All around the compound, Wade's men were throwing down their weapons, realizing the tide had turned. Only Wade himself remained defiant, drawing his prized revolver. "I built this," he shouted, his careful mask finally shattering completely. "Everything I did was to build something that would last." The gun swung between Sarah and Running Cloud, his hand shaking for the first time she could remember. "I won't let a savage and a treacherous woman destroy it all." Sarah met his wild gaze calmly. "You destroyed it yourself, Wade, with every person you hurt, every life you ruined." She took a step forward, feeling Running Cloud move with her. "The only thing you built was a prison, and now we're tearing it down." Wade's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, something unexpected happened. Old Joseph, his most loyal lieutenant for over a decade, stepped forward and grabbed his arm. "It's over, boss," the grizzled outlaw said quietly. "You told us we were protecting people, building something right. But she's telling the truth, ain't she? About the war you wanted to start. Take your hands off me." Wade tried to shake free, but more of his men were moving forward, their faces hard with betrayal. The revolver went off in the struggle, the bullet whining harmlessly into the night. Then Wade's prized weapon, the symbol of his authority for so long, was being pressed into Sarah's hands by his own men. She held it for a moment, feeling its familiar weight. How many times had she polished this gun, feared its power? Now it seemed smaller somehow, diminished like the man who had wielded it. Looking up, she found Running Cloud watching her, understanding in his eyes. Without a word, she turned and hurled the revolver into the flames, consuming the main house. The explosion of its ammunition was lost in a roll of thunder. Wade sagged in his men's grip, the fight draining out of him as he watched his weapon disappear. Around the compound, settlers and Lakota warriors moved together, securing prisoners, tending to the wounded, fighting to save what buildings they could from the fire. Sarah touched the blue bead on her bracelet, then reached for Running Cloud's hand. Together, they watched the rain begin to wash away the blood and smoke of battle. The storm that had aided their victory was finally beginning to ease, revealing stars in patches of clearing sky. "It's really over," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Running Cloud squeezed her hand. "No," he said softly, "it's just beginning." Dawn broke over the Black Hills, painting the aftermath in shades of gold and shadow. The compound's main house had burned to its foundations, leaving only smoldering timbers and ash. Sarah stood at its edge, watching as Running Cloud's warriors and settler allies worked together to treat the wounded and secure the remaining prisoners. A blood-stained bandana fluttered from the compound's gate, the makeshift flag that had signaled the end of the fighting. Sarah picked it up, feeling the rough fabric between her fingers. So much had changed in a single night. The army patrol. "We'll be here soon," Thomas Wheeler said, approaching with Black Elk. "Riders spotted them about 2 hours out. We need to decide what to do with him." He nodded toward the stable where Wade sat under guard, his once immaculate clothes now filthy and torn. "The papers prove his crimes," Sarah said, touching the documents she'd rescued from the fire. "But tribal courts won't have jurisdiction, and territorial judges—" She trailed off, knowing how easily Wade's money could influence white man's justice. Running Cloud joined them, his father's knife cleaned and returned to its sheath. "There is another way." He spoke in Lakota to Black Elk, who nodded gravely. "The old laws," Black Elk translated. "When a crime touches both peoples, both must judge." Sarah watched as their allies gathered, settlers who'd lost homes to Wade's. Greed, tribal members whose lands he'd threatened, women from the compound who'd lived under his cruelty. Together, they formed a circle, and in its center, they brought Wade Blackwood. "You think this is justice?" Wade sneered, though his voice shook slightly. "A bunch of savages and peasants playing court?" "No," Sarah stepped forward. "This is the reckoning you've earned." She held up the documents. "These papers prove you plan to start a war between settlers and tribes, to profit from death on both sides. And these scars," Annie spoke up, pushing back her sleeve to reveal old burns, "prove what kind of man you are, what kind of justice you deserve." One by one they spoke, victims and witnesses, survivors and defenders. Wade's expression changed from contempt to disbelief as he realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about his crimes against Sarah or the Lakota. It was about every person he'd wronged, every life he'd damaged, all coming together to demand answer. Running Cloud stood silent through the testimony, but his presence seemed to fill the circle. When the last person had spoken, he finally moved forward. "My father taught me that every soul carries two wolves inside," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "One of hatred, one of love. The one that grows stronger is the one you feed." He looked at Wade with something like pity. "You fed the wrong wolf for too long. What are you going to do?" Wade asked, his arrogance finally cracking. "Kill me?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "Death is too easy." She looked around the circle, seeing agreement in the faces there. "You'll face white man's court for your crimes. But first," she nodded to Running Cloud. He stepped forward, drawing his father's knife. Wade flinched, but Running Cloud simply cut a strip from the blood-stained bandana. With quick, precise movements, he wove it into a complex pattern with threads from his own shirt and Sarah's torn dress. "This marks you as one who has broken faith with both peoples," Black Elk explained, as Running Cloud tied the woven band around Wade's wrist. "You will wear it until you make amends. Every tribe, every settlement will know what it means. There will be no place in these hills where you can hide from what you've done." Wade stared at the band, as if it burned him. Perhaps it did, in some way that went deeper than flesh. Sarah saw in his face the moment he realized that his true punishment would not be prison bars, but the weight of his own actions made visible for all to see. The sound of approaching horses broke the morning quiet. The army patrol was nearly there. Sarah felt Running Cloud's hand find hers as they watched the sun climb higher over the hills. The night of blood and storm had passed, but its meaning would echo through these lands for generations to come. Black Elk raised his arms to the morning sky. "Let it be known," he said in both Lakota and English, "that on this day honor prevailed over hatred. Let it be remembered that justice came not from one people alone, but from many hearts beating as one." Sarah squeezed Running Cloud's hand, feeling the truth of those words in her soul. Wade had tried to build an empire on fear and division. In the end, that same fear and division had destroyed him, broken by the strength of people united in the cause of justice. Lieutenant James Morrison of the 7th Cavalry wasn't sure what to expect when his patrol reached the Blackwood compound. Reports of gunfire, explosions, and Indian activity had brought them riding hard through the night. What they found was something unprecedented. Settlers and Lakota warriors working side by side to treat wounded and clear debris, a compound's gate chain broken and discarded like a cast-off shackle. Sarah stood with Running Cloud as she explained everything to the lieutenant, providing Wade's documents as evidence. The young officer's face grew increasingly grave as he read through the papers. Selling weapons to both sides, planning to instigate tribal conflicts. These are serious federal crimes, Morrison said, looking at Wade where he sat under guard, the woven band stark against his skin. "Though I admit, I've never seen justice dispensed quite like this before. Sometimes the old ways and the new must find common ground," Running Cloud replied. Like rain and earth coming together to bring new growth. Morrison nodded slowly, surprising them with his understanding. My grandfather was Cherokee. He used to say something similar. He straightened, resuming his official manner. Mr. Blackwood will be transported to Fort Lincoln to await trial. As for the rest, he looked around at the mixed group of settlers in Lakota. I'd say you've all earned the right to determine your own path forward, but the price of that right soon became clear. As the morning wore on, riders brought news from other homesteads and camps. 3 settlers had died defending their lands. From Wade's men, 2 Lakota warriors had fallen in the tunnel collapse, and Thomas Wheeler's young son had been badly wounded helping the women escape. Sarah found Annie sitting alone by the remains of the main house, holding a charred piece of the secret journal they'd kept. Was it worth it? Annie asked softly. All this death and destruction. Sarah settled beside her, touching the blue bead on her bracelet. Wade's empire was built on death and destruction, she said. At least these sacrifices bought freedom, not just for us, but for everyone he would have hurt in his war. And what do we do with that freedom? The question hung in the air as Sarah watched Running Cloud speaking with Black Elk and other tribal leaders. They were discussing boundaries, agreements, ways to maintain the peace that had been forged in battle. It wouldn't be easy. Generations of mistrust couldn't be erased in a single night. But they had made a start. We build something. Better, Sarah finally answered. Something true. She walked through the compound one last time, remembering her days of captivity. Every step had been measured then, every word weighed for safety. Now her stride was sure, her head high. Near the burnt remains of Wade's office, she found a twisted piece of metal, part of the chain that had once barred the compound gate. She picked it up, feeling its broken links. Running Cloud appeared beside her, his presence as natural as breathing now. The army lieutenant says we must clear the compound, he said. Too many questions if we stay. Sarah nodded. Already their allies were departing, settlers to their homes, warriors to their camps. The unity of battle would be tested in the days to come, but the memory of what they'd achieved together would remain. Black Elk has offered you a place with our people. Running Cloud continued carefully. Or Wheeler says his trading post needs someone good with numbers. And what do you offer? Sarah asked, meeting his eyes. A path between worlds. It will not be easy. There will be those on both sides who resist change. Sarah thought of Wade in army custody, of the trial to come, of the long process of healing that lay ahead for everyone touched by his cruelty. She looked at the broken chain in her hand, then let it fall to the earth. The easy path led me to Wade, she said. I think I'm ready for something harder, something real. Running Cloud's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Without words, he took her hand, and together they walked away from the compound. Behind them, the morning sun caught the blood-stained bandana still flying from the gate, transforming it into a banner of hope for the future they would build together. Sarah woke before sunrise on her first true morning of freedom, stepping quietly from the lodge Black Elk's people had provided. The air was crisp with autumn's promise, and dew sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds. She carried her most precious possession, a small piece of canvas and the few paints she'd managed to salvage from the compound. Finding a spot that overlooked both the Lakota camp and the distant settler homesteads, she began to paint. Art had been her secret rebellion during her captivity, tiny landscapes hidden between the pages of Wade's ledgers. Now she could finally capture the world as she truly saw it. Not divided, but whole. Running Cloud found her there, as she knew he would. He watched in silence as she added the final touches, golden sunlight breaking through storm clouds, illuminating both the teepees of his people and the wooden cabins of the settlers. Your hands speak truth without words, he said softly, settling beside her. I needed to capture this moment, Sarah replied, adding one final detail, a hawk soaring between the two communities, before everything changes again. Word had come. Last night that Wade's trial would begin soon. Sarah would have to testify, to face him one last time in a white man's court, but she wasn't afraid. The woman who had trembled at Wade's footsteps was gone, transformed like the landscape after. A cleansing storm. Black Elk says the Peace Pipe's vision is already spreading, Running Cloud said, showing her a message wrapped around an arrow shaft, the traditional way his people sent urgent news. Other bands, other settler groups, they want to know how we achieved this unity. Sarah touched the blue bead on her bracelet, remembering the night they'd woven their two languages into one. They'll want a simple answer, a single moment or decision that changed everything. But it wasn't simple, Running Cloud nodded. It was many small choices, many small courages. He was right. Sarah thought of Annie and the other wives, their secret journal recording years of quiet resistance. Of Thomas Wheeler's son, taking an arrow while helping others escape. Of old Joseph, finally choosing truth over loyalty to Wade. 1,000 tiny acts of bravery that had finally broken the chains of fear. The sun crested the hills, bringing color to her painting. From the camp below, sounds of mourning drifted up. Children's laughter, women's songs, the rhythms of life continuing, despite all that had changed. A group of settler women had come to trade, their wagons filled with cloth and preserves. Among them, Sarah recognized faces from the compound, wives and servants who had chosen to build new lives. Wheeler's offering to make me a partner in the trading post, Sarah said, watching as Lakota women greeted the settlers with growing familiarity. Says my knowledge of numbers and people would help build honest trade between the communities. A good path, Running Cloud agreed. One that honors both worlds. He touched the wooden charm at his neck. My father believed that understanding grows like a tree, slow but strong, with roots that run deep. Sarah added a few more strokes to her painting, blending the colors where earth met sky. And what do you believe? Running Cloud's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. I believe that some storms come not to destroy, but to clear the way for new growth. Together, they watched the rising sun illuminate the valley where two peoples were learning to write a new story. Sarah's painting captured not just the landscape, but the promise of that dawn, the moment when fear's long shadow finally gave way to hope's first light. The wind carried the scent of sage and pine, of wood smoke and fresh bread, of change and possibility. Sarah felt it play with her hair, no longer bound in the severe style Wade had demanded, free like her heart, free like her future. The territorial courthouse in Deadwood was packed the day of Wade's trial. Sarah sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her testimony clear and unwavering. She wore a dress that combined settler and Lakota styles, calico fabric adorned with beadwork that told the story of transformation. Running Cloud sat in the gallery, an unprecedented sight that had caused much murmuring among the townspeople. It was over. When Wade was led away to serve his sentence, Sarah didn't feel the triumph she'd expected. Instead, she felt something quieter, the sense of a chapter closing, making room for new pages to be written. Outside the courthouse, Running Cloud waited with Black Elk and Thomas Wheeler. The old trader's injuries were healing well, and his trading post had become a symbol of the new cooperation between communities. The Army lieutenant says there's talk in Washington, Wheeler reported. They're interested in our peace council, how we've managed to keep both settlers and tribes happy these past months. They will try to control it, Black Elk said wisely, to make it fit their rules. Let them try, Sarah replied, touching the beaded bracelet that had become a symbol of her journey. Some things can't be contained by rules. They have to grow. Naturally, like Running Cloud's father said. The mention of his father made Running Cloud smile. He had been teaching Sarah the sacred stories of his people, just as she had been teaching him the accounting skills needed for fair trade. Their lessons often took place in the evening, sitting beneath the stars, their words mixing English and Lakota in a language uniquely their own. "There is something we must discuss," Black Elk said, his face serious. "The tribal council has made a decision. Running Cloud has been chosen to travel to other bands, to share our ways of peace. It is a great honor." Sarah felt her heart skip. She had known this moment would come, when their paths might diverge. Running Cloud had duties to his people just as she had responsibilities at the trading post, but Running Cloud's hand found hers, steady and sure. "I have accepted," he said, "on one condition." His eyes met hers, full of quiet certainty. "That my partner comes with me." Partner. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. From his shirt, Running Cloud withdrew something that made Black Elk's eyes widen. A marriage blanket, but unlike any Sarah had seen before. Its pattern combined traditional Lakota designs with settler quilting, techniques telling their story in a way both peoples could read. "Two paths can become one," Running Cloud said softly, without either losing its way. Sarah touched the blanket, feeling the months of secret work that must have gone into its making. She saw her own journey woven into its fabric. Captivity and freedom, fear and courage, endings and beginnings. "The trading post," she began, but Wheeler cut her off with a laugh. "Girl, you've already trained 3 apprentices in your methods. Annie's got a better head for numbers than both of us combined." The old trader's eyes were kind. "Some people are meant for bigger things." Black Elk stepped forward, his weathered hands touching the marriage blanket. "Among my people we say that the strongest bridges are built by those who know both shores. You and Running Cloud, you are such builders." Sarah looked at Running Cloud, seeing in his eyes the same vision that had brought them together, that storm-swept night, a future where understanding grew stronger than fear, where different worlds met not in conflict, but in harmony. "Yes," she said simply, taking the blanket in her hands. Her fingers found a blue bead woven into its edge, identical to the one on her bracelet. Truth, wisdom, and the sky that watched over all. 20 years later, a young girl sat in Wheeler's trading post, carefully turning the pages of an old journal. Its leather cover was worn smooth by countless hands, its pages filled with different styles of handwriting, some neat and precise, others flowing, some in English, others in Lakota. "That's quite a story you're reading there," Annie said, her once dark hair now streaked with silver. She'd run the trading post since Thomas Wheeler's passing, maintaining it as a bridge between cultures just as Sarah had envisioned. "Is it true?" the girl asked, touching a beaded bracelet identical to the one in the journal's descriptions. "About the storm, and the warrior, and the cruel man who built his empire on lies." "Every word." Annie smiled, looking out the trading post window toward the hills. "Your mother and father wrote most of it down themselves, though many others added their memories too. We wanted to make sure it wouldn't be forgotten." The girl, named Dawn for the promise of that first morning, of freedom, knew parts of the story already. She'd grown up traveling between settler towns and tribal camps with her parents, watching them build understanding between peoples who had once feared each other. But reading the whole tale, seeing how it all began, made her understand her heritage in a new way. "There's something else you should see," Annie said, bringing out a carefully wrapped bundle. Inside was a painting, the colors still vivid after 2 decades. Sunrise breaking through storm clouds, illuminating both teepees and cabins, with a hawk soaring between. "Your mother painted this the morning after it all ended, or perhaps the morning it all truly began." Annie's fingers traced the edge of the frame. "We keep it here to remind us that change is possible, even when the night seems darkest." Through the window, Dawn could see riders approaching, her parents returning from their latest journey. Sarah and Running Cloud had never stopped their work, though their methods had evolved with time. The trading post was just one of many now, forming a network of commerce and communication across the territory. The old stories said Running Cloud's father's knife and Sarah's rescued documents were kept in a special lodge, along with Wade's woven band of judgment and other artifacts from that night. But Dawn knew the real legacy wasn't in objects. It was in the way people lived now. Settlers and tribes trading freely, children growing up speaking both languages, councils where all voices were heard. "Your mother once told me," Annie said softly, "that the most powerful chains are the ones we forge in our own minds. Fear of the different, fear of change. But those are also the chains we have the power to break." Dawn touched the painting one last time before Annie wrapped it carefully away. Outside, she could hear her parents' voices mixing English and Lakota as they greeted friends from both communities. Their love had helped write a new story for the Black Hills, one that would echo through generations. The old journal's final entry, written in Sarah's flowing hand, seemed to capture it all. We often speak of legacies in terms of what we leave behind, but perhaps the truest legacy is what we pass forward. The courage to choose a different path, the wisdom to see beyond our fears, the strength to build bridges where others would build walls. Running Cloud and I have traveled many miles since that storm-swept night, and everywhere we go, we find the same truth, that love, understanding, and justice can flourish in any soil if we only have the courage to plant their seeds. Dawn closed the journal gently, hearing in its leather-bound pages the thunder of that long-ago storm, the whispered prayers of two peoples becoming one, the quiet triumph of hearts that dared to believe in something better. Outside, the Black Hills stretched toward the horizon, no longer divided but whole, a living testament to the power of those who dare to forge new paths and break old chains. She stood, ready to greet her parents, knowing she carried their legacy not just in her blood, but in her spirit. Above the trading post, a hawk circled in the clear autumn sky, free and unbound, soaring between earth and heaven, just as her parents had taught her to walk between worlds.